Before we can really understand obesity as a disease and what it does to the body and what we can actually do about obesity to minimize the risks that are associated with it, we really have to understand this concept of energy balance. And I think it's important when we say energy balance to be clear about what we mean by it. So there's these kind of two prevailing definitions of energy balance that kind of mean different things to different people. So I want to just kind of clarify what we typically mean when we mean energy balance. It usually means either the state achieved when energy intake equals energy expenditure. So this means that, let's say someone consumes a 2,000 calorie diet from food, and they also burn 2,000 calories via physical activity, basal metabolism, and the thermic effect of food. So according to this one definition of energy balance, that would mean that energy intake equals energy expenditure, 2,000 in, 2,000 out, you are in balance, okay, as the graph, as the scales show right here on this slide. And when someone is in energy balance, that means that there is no favoring of energy storage on the body. Your weight and your fat mass, I should say, associated weight stays about the same, okay? However, sometimes the term energy balance kind of focuses more on like what the balance is, like what's kind of left over, okay, after we look at energy intake and energy expenditure. So both definitions consider energy intake, how much food you take in, food energy you take in, and energy expenditure, how much you burn of that food energy plus your energy stores. Okay, so with this second energy balance concept, what we really mean is when I look at how much energy a person took in versus how much energy they expended, what's kind of left over or what's left as a deficit. Okay, so someone might be in a positive balance when they consume more energy than they expend. Okay, so positive energy balance, someone consumes 2,500 calories in a day and they only burn 2,000. There is a 500 kilocalorie surplus. They are in an energy surplus, and in that state, especially if that state remains that way for a while, that person is more likely to be storing energy on the body, the majority of which is stored as fat mass. Okay, so a positive balance promotes fat mass gain and weight gain. Whereas a negative balance, this would be like someone consuming 2,000 calories a day and burning 2,500 calories a day, usually through more exercise. And that we would call a negative energy balance or an energy deficit. Okay, that person needed 2,500 calories because that's how much they burned in the day, but they only took in 2,000. So I'm at a deficit. I need energy from somewhere. And when someone's at an energy deficit, what happens is we go to our energy stores, like our fat cells, for instance, and take some of the energy as stored as fat from those fat cells, and then we can use them to fuel the activities that we need to fuel. Okay, so that's kind of this idea of energy balance. And you'll often hear when people talk about energy balance is they talk about the first rule of thermodynamics, which basically argues that energy is neither created or destroyed. It's only changed from one form to another. And how this relates to energy balance and obesity and weight management in general is that if someone's energy stores are going up, right? So they're storing more fat mass on the body. It has to be because they took in more energy than they burned. That energy came from somewhere and it came from food. And also if someone is losing fat mass from the body, right? We're depleting those energy stores. That means that energy expenditure was higher than energy intake. And so just explaining this a little bit further and hopefully hammering in this concept a little bit better, I want to kind of bring you through this diagram that I created that kind of cycles through how we use energy and how we burn and how we take in energy. Okay, so we'll start kind of at 1, although you could kind of start anywhere on this diagram. And basically when our needs, our energy expenditure is higher than the energy we take in, right? So we need 2,500 calories a day and we only took in 2,000. I need 500 extra calories of energy. I didn't take that in from food. I need it from somewhere. Where do I mostly get it from? I mostly get it from my fat cells. My fat cells store energy as fat, okay? The adipocytes, they're going to release some of these lipids, and these lipids can then be metabolized through cellular respiration, specifically through beta oxidation, which allows us to replenish ATP, right? Basically, the end point of cellular respiration and the metabolism of lipids is going to help us regenerate ADP, adenosine triphosphate, from adenosine diphosphate through kind of adding back that extra phosphate group due to the energy that was released through cellular respiration. Okay, so now I have ATP. I've replenished ATP. I needed more energy. Where did I get that energy from? I got it from my adipose tissue. I broke down my fats in my adipose tissue. I use that to replenish ATP. And now ATP, once I break that second high energy bond, as we're doing right here, I release energy, and that energy can be used to fuel those needs of the body, right? So the needs to keep the body just alive, basal metabolism, and then the needs to move our body, physical activity, and then the needs of the body that are associated with processing food, what we sometimes called diet-induced thermogenesis, or I call it the thermic effect of food. I wrote thermogenesis here, but thermic effect of food can be a bit better, okay? So I needed more energy. I took it from my fat cells. I metabolized the fat in those fat cells. I was able to use that process of metabolism to help regenerate ATP, and then I can use ATP, cut off that second high energy bond to promote the needs of my body. Okay, but then I'm left with adenosine diphosphate. I broke that second high energy bond. I'm left with adenosine diphosphate. And if I want to keep fueling the needs of my body, I need to keep replenishing it, right? Because ATP is the energy currency of the body. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, mostly I replenish energy by eating. Okay, so when I eat carbohydrates, when I eat lipids, when I eat proteins and alcohol actually as well, those can be metabolized, broken down, cellular respiration, broken down. And at the end of the electron transport chain, I use that metabolism of fuels to basically release energy and recapture it as ATP, right? And then this cycle can continue. So I eat to make ATP, so then I can do the functions of my body. However, if I take in more energy than I actually need, right? When energy intake is higher than energy expenditure, that extra energy, the majority of what's left over, so you ate 2,500 calories, but you only needed 2,000, you have 500 kilocalories extra of energy, the majority of that is going to be stored in my adipose tissue. So later, when I'm at an energy deficit, I can take that and the cycle continues. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of energy balance, kind of putting in a lot of concepts together. And so to zoom out a little bit more and kind of come back to basics as well, is again, when energy intake, so let's say I consumed 2,500 kcals of energy and I only needed 2,000 kilocalories of energy. When energy intake is higher than energy expenditure, whatever's left over is for the most part already lipids, or it's going to be, and this is a minor pathway, converted into lipids. Usually I just use my proteins and carbs for other purposes. Okay, well, carbs I just use for energy right away, and proteins I typically use for other purposes like growth and repair. Okay, but whatever is left over past my energy needs is mostly lipids, and I mostly store those lipids already, that are already lipids, as within my adipose tissue. Okay, and then some carbs and proteins can be converted, amino acids can be converted into lipids as well. And when I store lipids in my fat cells and my adipocytes, those adipocytes get bigger and they can multiply as well. And this leads to an increase in fat mass. And an increase in fat mass is the main thing typically that drives a more drastic increase in body weight. Okay, so this is just a picture of what my adipose tissue looks like. It looks like a bunch of empty cells, and they look empty because when I prepare these slides, well, when someone else prepares these slides, they wash it with a fat wash, which gets rid of the lipids that are in those. These adipocytes actually have a large central vacuole, and that large central vacuole is where I store all those lipids. Okay. So, like I mentioned, when energy intake is higher than energy expenditure, there is a promotion of energy storage as lipids in my adipocytes. And adipocytes increase, or I should say adipose tissue increases in mass and in size through two main processes: hyperplasia, as in an increase in number, and hypertrophy, right? Which just means that they get bigger. Okay, so I'm filling up my fat cells, filling them up, they're getting bigger and bigger, more and more lipids are in that vacuole. That's hypertrophy. And then past a certain threshold, I'm also going to increase the number of fat cells. And what's really annoying is that we technically have like an unlimited capacity to keep making more and more fat cells. When it comes to the increase in the mass of my adipose tissue, I'm a little bit more concerned, or I'm way more concerned about hypertrophy, right? Because the hypertrophic adipose tissue, this is the one that's more associated with inflammation. And that's what kind of links obesity with all the other comorbidities like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Although you can't like say, hey, cells, hyperplasia over hypertrophy. You can't like force them in a particular direction as of yet. I don't know if science is even exploring that right now. Okay, so this is just a diagram. This is actually from mice, but just to give you an idea of how adipose tissue changes. So if we look at 2 levels of magnification, okay, so we have 4 times magnification, same tissue here. A standard diet mouse, you can see what their adipose tissue looks like. And these are the same mouse in this case on a high-fat diet, just a higher caloric intake diet in this case, where the mouse ate a lot more and energy intake was higher than energy expenditure. So you'll notice how much bigger, this is the same magnification here. You'll notice how much bigger those cells get. And if I zoom in even more, you get a better sense of how much bigger compared to a, let's say, normal-sized mouse, those hypertrophic adipocytes are. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how adipose tissue expands. Okay, on the other side, to bring this all together, right, when energy expenditure is higher than energy intake, that means that I need more energy, right? Let's say I burned 2,500 calories, but I only took in 2,000. I always like to use these numbers because they're easy, right? I'm at a deficit. I need 500 extra calories than I took in. I need them. I have to get them from somewhere. So where do I mostly get them from? I mostly get them from my adipocytes, like I explained earlier, right? And as those adipocytes, they free up those lipids, they tend to get smaller in size, okay? So hypertrophy in this case, and they can slightly decrease in number, right? There's evidence to suggest they do decrease in number, but the total amount will still stay higher if an individual has obesity and they lose fat mass. The total number of adipocytes is still higher than someone that never gained weight to begin with. I know, unfortunately. Okay. We can also get some energy from body proteins and a little bit extra from stored glycogen, but not much. We don't really store that much energy as carbs on the body. But when someone is at an energy deficit, something to keep in mind, as much as they are losing fat mass, they also tend to lose some lean body mass. We do tend to break down body proteins, which we can then use those amino acids found in there through cellular respiration to regenerate ATP. So when people are at a low calorie diet consistently, we often see a decrease in lean body mass. And that's one of the reasons why we often recommend exercise alongside an energy deficit just through food, because we want to make sure we maintain muscle mass, because that's always important. So what I've been summarizing so far is how we gain or lose fat mass, right? Because fat mass is the main thing we store, the main way we store energy on the body. However, often you hear conversations around weight, and weight isn't necessarily the same as fat mass, right? Fat mass is one of the main things that determines body weight, because they weigh a certain amount, okay? So when my body increases or decreases in the number or size of adipocytes, you're going to see a change in fat mass and associated change in weight. However, even if the fat stores never change, you might see an increase and decrease in weight associated with the change in lean body mass, right? So this is someone that maybe they're doing a lot of resistance training, but trying to keep their energy intake and energy expenditure a little bit more pegged. And you could see an increase in muscle hypertrophy, mostly muscle increases by hypertrophy, which can increase lean body mass. So this is something else that can increase a body's weight, one that we're less concerned about as far as negative health effects. We're not concerned about it as far as negative health effects. Typically, increasing lean body mass that's good. We want that, okay? You can also shift in weight by up to about 1 kilogram, maybe 2 kilograms, just because of changes in glycogen mass. But this is kind of a small reservoir for energy store. The last kind of point I wanted to make here as far as how our weight goes up or down, like I said, it's mostly due to changes in adipose tissue mass, but lean body mass as well. And like I said, we can lose body proteins as we are at our energy deficit too, okay? But if you're noticing shifts, or if a person is noticing shifts of like 1 pound or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 sometimes within a day, you're not gaining or losing 5 pounds worth of lean body mass or fat mass in a day. That's not going to happen, okay? Chances are those fluctuations, or even if weight drops by like 5 pounds in a week, usually a lot of those smaller perturbations are associated with changes in water mass. Okay, so for instance, if someone is retaining a lot of water, maybe they eat a lot of salty foods, a lot of processed foods around the holidays, they're more likely to gain a lot of water mass. Okay, but that's transient. We're kind of less concerned about that than significant increases in adipose tissue mass. Okay, what's annoying is that an individual with obesity or that's formerly obese, because they have more fat cells, they have more extracellular water, more room for extracellular water, the water outside of cells. So there's a chance that there's going to be kind of larger fluctuations in body water weight from one day to another. Right? I personally am formerly obese, and it is crazy how much my weight can fluctuate from one day to another, like up to about 4 pounds from one day to another. It's luckily I have good mental health around my weight, but it can really kind of mess with someone's head. And it also, I should argue, sometimes when people go on like really low calorie diets, really like fad diets, they notice a big drop in weight right away. That's often mostly water weight, right? And then we're going to see a plateau. Okay, so if you're noticing these large fluctuations or even smaller fluctuations day to day, I wouldn't get too worried about them. I would look at more like the trends of weight over time. Okay, to kind of get a better picture of what's happening to all 4 of these components, but the one we're most concerned about are changes in adipose tissue mass. Okay, so in the next module, I'm going to come back and I'm going to dive into energy intake a little bit further and talk about how the energy yielding nutrients plus alcohol determine how much energy we take into the body. I'll see you then.